Hello, hi everyone. Welcome back to Woo Can Cook. My name is Wesley, and this is a show where we are slowly cooking our way through all of the food from my childhood. Today we're adding to our series dedicated to Chinese breakfast foods with a shot at a dim sum dish that I've been eating for pretty much my whole life, but have never once considered trying to make, mostly because I always assumed that they were a lot harder to make than they actually are. The Chinese minced meat pie, or Xian Bing, is made up of a pretty simple flour and water-based dough, then filled with a minced meat filling, flattened, and finally pan-seared and steamed. Now, for those keeping track, the concept of a meat pie is certainly not unique to Chinese food. You'll come across the similarly assembled minced pie in England, the empanada in Latin America, the Jamaican Patty in Jamaica. The variations are truly endless. It's not a very complicated concept after all. What has always stood out to me about the Xian Bing, however, is the pleated pattern that appears on the top of the pie as a result of the way that it's assembled, which you'll notice looks a lot like a baozi or xiao because they are all folded using the same method. So, we're going to take a look at all of that today, as well as a few of my favorite additions to a Xian Bing, including some celery heart and a bit of white pepper and Chinese 5-spice for their aromatic qualities. Okay, so let's get into it. I said everybody wants the food. I still got streets, but they don't love me like they used to love it. And I'm reminded of how bad I used to want. Okay, so kicking things off as we frequently do, this is 4 cloves of crushed and minced garlic, followed by 1 inch or about 1 tablespoon of finely minced ginger. Fair warning, keep in mind today that we are going to be throwing this all into our mince filling, which means that these aromatics are not going to be fried at all like they normally are. So pay a little bit more attention to your fine mince today, because the filling here is not going to be quite as forgiving with those errant chunks of ginger as a wok fry frequently is. Next up is a couple of green onions here, which I'm still separating by their whites and greens so that we can slice those whites a little bit more thinly than those greens. These are all still going to the same place though, so no need to store these separately. Then next is one of my favorite additions to a Xian Bing, which is a bit of celery heart, or the centerpiece of a celery stalk. This bit is going to be a little bit more tender and flavorful than those outer ribs, which is going to make them ideal for our filling today. I'm trimming off those leafy bits, doing a dice on about 3 of these, then setting them aside while we dive into our ground meat next. Alright, so in my largest mixing bowl here, I have 8 ounces or half a pound of ground meat. Today I'm using ground pork, but ground beef, chicken, or turkey would also work. What's most important here is that whatever you do use, we want a very fatty cut of meat for a nice juicy filling. I'm adding my garlic, ginger, green onions, and celery hearts to the bowl, then following this all up with my wet ingredients next. This is 4 tablespoons of soy sauce to start, followed by a tablespoon each of Shaoxing wine for a bit of brightness, then oyster sauce and dark soy sauce for our more rich umami qualities. Then next up, before you mix everything together here, I'm rounding things off with my aromatic spices. This is half a teaspoon each of Chinese 5-spice and white pepper. Then we're mixing this all to combine, and we're setting it aside while we get to work on our dough next. Into my second largest mixing bowl, I'm measuring out here 2 cups of AP flour combined with half a cup of water and a pinch of kosher salt. Now, if you're using cup measurements like I am today, you'll want to keep in mind that measuring flour by cup is notoriously inaccurate. So as we mix our dough together, if it's looking a little bit dry like mine is, don't be afraid to add a little bit more water to adjust. I ended up adding almost a 1/4 cup more water to mine here. Once a smooth dough forms, I'm covering this up with a bit of plastic wrap, then setting it aside so that gluten can rest for 30 minutes. If you're planing things properly, probably do this dough first before you do that filling, because then it can rest while you make your filling. Otherwise, you'll just end up sitting around waiting like me. But anyway, 30 minutes later, our dough looks pretty much the same. Then I'm separating this out into 8 equal pieces. Mine ended up being about 1.8 ounces each, but do some simple math for yourself, weigh out the whole ball of dough, and divide by 8. Boom, math. Once we have our dough portioned out, I'm liberally flouring my work surface, then rolling these into coin shapes by rotating a 1/4 turn after each roll until about 6 inches in diameter. I'm brushing these down with a bit of sesame oil, then rolling these up first lengthwise, then turning and rolling again in the opposite direction. Then I'm flattening these out and rolling my dough out one more time with a quarter turn after each roll again. Now, if you're wondering, Wesley, that seems like a lot of extra work, right? Then yes, you are right. You can absolutely skip this step if you want to, but I gotta tell you, it does help create that nice flaky texture that we're going for here, so you do you. I'm adding a pinch of flour to the surface of my dough here so that these don't stick together. Then I'm putting a dumb action movie on and settling in, because this is gonna take a while. 8 balls of dough later, or I think about 30 minutes, we've got these gorgeous looking wrappers lined up and we're diving into our filling next. Alright, so for those who recall the baozi recipe that I did a while back, this is going to start looking pretty familiar because we're going to be employing the same pleated fold technique with one key change at the very end. I'm adding about 1 heaping tablespoon of filling to the center of my wrapper, then closing by pinching the edge, turning and repeating until we have what should look at this point a lot like a baozi or dumpling. Then next, I'm twisting off the extra dough on top, flipping it over and gently pressing it into my work surface to flatten these out. Now, very important, I did say gently. If you press too hard, these things are just gonna explode, so I'll say it one more time, gently. I'm repeating this 8 times, then taking these dough scraps and doing my very best to make a 9th Xian Bing out of it. Well, there's your ugly duckling, I guess. Then I'm setting this aside and we're heading over to the stove. Over on the stove, I've got my cast iron skillet heating up on medium-high heat. Then I'm adding 4 tablespoons of peanut oil and, as always, long yao for that nice non-stick surface. Then I'm going with the classic fry, steam, fry method that you'll recognize from our pot sticker video not too long ago. We're adding our Xian Bing pleated side down and frying for 1 minute, then covering and frying for an additional 2 minutes. Then I'm flipping, pausing to admire our perfectly golden brown sear, returning our lid to the pan and searing the second side for an additional 3 minutes. I'm looking for 165 degrees F internal temperature here, then repeating with the remaining Xian Bing. Go ahead and ignore this first batch that burnt, and we're ready to eat. Okay, so I'll start by mentioning that if we're comparing this to the Chinese baozi, which would be the steamed bun equivalent, these Xian Bing are much easier to make, mainly because there's no yeast involved at all. So if you're not familiar with active yeast cultures and dough proofing, this is going to be a lot less intimidating since our dough is literally just made of flour and water. For that reason, I'd also say that these are actually more similar to a pot sticker than a baozi, even though they look like a flattened baozi, given the way that they're fried in the pan. These things travel really well, which make them great if you're trying to eat breakfast on the go, and it's honestly one of the most delicious things that I've made for breakfast in quite a while, even though I did end up eating them in the late afternoon because I planned poorly. Lastly, I'll also mention that these Xian Bing are super hearty and filling, and after eating 4 of them, I remembered that I frequently avoid these things on the dim sum cart because you'll fill up on them pretty quick and you won't have room for anything else, so plan accordingly. Okay, so that's it everyone. I hope you enjoyed this and I hope you give this one a shot. If you're new to the channel, this Xian Bing is also part of a larger series that we've been doing that's dedicated to the endless number of delicious things that I grew up eating for breakfast. So if you want to find more fun things to make for breakfast, definitely check out that series because there's a lot of these now. If you're local to the California Bay Area, the Wu Can Cook Fried Rice Pop-Up is back at the Alameda Antiques Fair this coming Sunday, so swing by and come say hi if you want. More about that at wucancook.com/eats. As always, like, comment, subscribe, share, be nice, and I'll see you soon. Bye.